Multiple explosions hit the city of Kyiv Sunday morning. A Ukrainian official says 5 Russian cruise missiles were launched toward the city. Ukraine's air defense unit destroyed one. The other 4 struck facilities in the north of the capital. It was the first attack on Kyiv in over a month. No one died, but one person has been hospitalized. Russian President Putin warned Sunday that his country would strike new targets if the U.S. supplies Ukraine with long-range missiles. This comes after President Biden announced the U.S. would provide Ukraine with new advanced rocket systems. Meanwhile, fighting has intensified in the east. A Ukrainian military official says Russian forces are advancing in areas north of Sloviansk. Another official says in the past 24 hours, Russian shelling has killed 8 civilians in the Donetsk region. And in the city of Severodonetsk, Ukraine claims it has recaptured about half of the area from Russian forces. Joining me now from Odessa is CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay. Chris, welcome. There were missile strikes in Odessa Saturday and Kyiv Sunday. What can you tell us about these attacks?
Hi, Ali. Yeah, what's significant about those attacks on first glance is that they're not in eastern Ukraine, where the fighting is concentrated and where Putin is ostensibly eager to focus at the time. He removed his troops from Kyiv and Kharkiv in northern Ukraine back in April. His troops never made it to Odessa by land, even though it's always been in his sights from the very beginning. Both of these cities represent humiliating defeats for Vladimir Putin. So what does he do? He shows that they're never out of danger. The skies are always the enemy here in Ukraine. And here's one more example of Putin out to show that he can strike wherever and whenever he wants.
Chris, President Putin warned the U.S. against sending certain weapons to Ukraine. He said on TV this will only drag out the conflict and Moscow will retaliate with new strikes. How seriously should the U.S. and Ukraine take this threat?
Well, Ukraine doesn't take these threats very seriously because it doesn't take anything Vladimir Putin says very seriously. He's been denying, before the war even started, he denied that this war was ever going to happen. He denied over and over again, told world leaders, you're overreacting, even though I'm building up troops along the border. And then what did he do? He invaded. And he did so when Ukraine didn't have these weapon systems. So the Ukrainians have no reason to fear that things should necessarily get worse, since he's going to attack anyway. And they've been extremely effective at pushing Putin back and pushing his forces back. I mentioned northern Ukraine. That was thanks to the ferocious counterattacks by the Ukrainians. So it shows that when they do have the right weapon systems, they actually can be very effective, and that Putin does respond to force. So it seems like Vladimir Putin is simply complaining that the fight is no longer as unfair as it was when it started.
And Chris, this conflict has gone on for more than 100 days now. The U.S. is providing significant aid to Ukraine, both money and arms. Is there a fear that political will to keep helping Ukraine will dry up?
There is. I mean, we've seen the toll that it's taken on the U.S. economy. People are tired of watching what the impact that the sanctions are having on the stock market, on things like Bitcoin, perhaps. And so, yeah, the Ukrainians are very worried about this. France recently, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, said repeatedly that we need to avoid humiliating Vladimir Putin. But that's the opposite of what the Ukrainians want to do. They want to humiliate him on the battlefield so that, number one, Ukraine won't fall. And number two, the problem won't spill across the border. So this is terrifying not just to Ukrainians, but to other people who worry that Ukraine is not the end goal for Vladimir Putin, and that if he just gets off with a ceasefire, he uses this to rearm. It's what he did back in 2014, for instance, when this war began to rage. In the meantime, it's been reduced to a sort of slow boil. But in that time, he was able to rearm and then attack back in February. So people are very concerned that if we don't stop him here, then we're going to have a much bigger problem on our hands. He might attack a NATO ally like Poland, which Russia has threatened to do over and over again. And once that happens, the United States would be obligated under its NATO treaty to participate and possibly send troops on the ground here. And we're going to wish, according to those who believe in this theory, we're going to wish that we had never let it escalate to that point, and that we had given Ukraine more support so that it could do the fight for the West on its own.
And Chris, how are Ukrainian forces doing in the east now?
Well, it's become one of the bloodiest phases of the war. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, says that now 20% of Ukraine is under Russian control, and that is concentrated in eastern Ukraine, where, according to Ukrainian officials, it's losing between 60 and 100 troops every day. And to just put that in perspective for you, that's roughly twice the number of troops that the United States was losing in 1968, one of the bloodiest years of the Vietnam War. So it is indeed a bloody war. Nevertheless, thanks to some of these heavy artillery, long-range weapons that are coming in from the United States and other Western countries, Ukraine has proven its ability to blunt this offensive from Russia in the east, to contain it, and in some cases to even take back pieces of territory, like in the city of Severodonetsk. As you mentioned, it's proven its ability to recapture portions of that city, which had been seen as something that would inevitably fall to Russia, but it's now very much in play right now, with Ukraine holding on to important parts of that city.
Chris Livesay, thank you.
Thank you.